Good morning and welcome to City Hall. We'll get started with the invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance. Reverend Don Richards is from Asbury United Methodist Church. She'll lead us in the invocation. Afterwards, I'll ask Councilman Shadid to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Would everyone please stand?
Please pray with me. Most Holy One, we lift up all of the people who are living on the East Coast who are affected by Hurricane Sandy and this tropical storm. The effects have been devastating. We are so blessed here in Oklahoma City right now to have our electricity and to not be flooded and to have our homes intact. We ask, O Lord, that you bring peace, safety to those people who are living on the East Coast. We ask, Lord, that those who might have a spirit of violence not loot, not take advantage of the destruction so that they can prey on others. We ask instead, Lord, for a spirit of cooperation because, Lord, when we work together, we are a mighty nation. And so we ask, Lord, for cooperation and peace, and for people to just join together and show what Americans are made of, and not the destructive forces that sometimes we turn into. Lord, we pray for this city council meeting today, and Lord, some of it may seem mundane, and yet it is what makes our city great. The discussions, especially, Lord, as they bring to the issue of the park. This is something that can bring people to Oklahoma City and a desire to live here, a desire to bring their businesses here. This is something that can make us one of the greater cities in this country. And Lord, what we strive for is a city in which people can live in prosperity, but also in peace and with beauty surrounding us, a reminder of how great and awesome you are. And so, Lord, as the city council meeting is held today, may they remember that there is only one true master in our world, and it is you. In the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll call the meeting to order. We have a couple of appointments on item 3. I'll ask for a motion.
Move the appointment. Second.
Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 4 is the Journal of Council Proceedings. Item 4A is to receive the Journal of Council Proceedings for October 23rd, and item 4B is to approve the Journal of Council Proceedings for October 16th. Any comments or questions on the Journal? Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 5 is request for uncontested continuances.
Mayor, this morning on page 7, under item 8A, SPUD 672 in Ward 4, the applicant has asked that this be deferred until November 20th.
Still November?
November 20th.
December down in my notes. Okay.
Still on page 7, under item 8B1, item C, 1507 Northwest 17th, we ask that that be stricken. The owner has removed. Moving on to page 8, under item 8D1, under unsecured, item C, 903 North Leroy, we ask that that be stricken. The owner has secured. Item D, 2101 North Minnie Lane, we ask that that be stricken. The owner has secured. Item E, 2904 North Vermont, we ask that that be stricken. The owner has secured. Item J, 2927 Northwest 17th, we ask that that be stricken. The owner has secured. Item L, 5800 Northwest 29th Street, we ask that that be stricken. The owner has secured. And finally, item M, 1904 Northwest 38th Street, we ask that that be stricken. The owner has secured.
All right, any other requests for uncontested continuances?
Your Honor,
Yes.
with regard to the matter on page 7 under item 8A, The reason that item is being deferred is because there has not been any contact with the surrounding neighborhood. It had quite a bit of protest, and there's been no contact with the neighborhood at all. I'd like to be sure that I'm advised as when the meeting is. And also, I would like for the applicant to provide me with a list of similar uses in rural areas in eastern Oklahoma County or northeastern Cleveland County, so I could look at some other uses that are done that way before we have the meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Well, let's recess the council meeting, convene as the Oklahoma City Municipal Facilities Authority. There are 3 items. Comments or questions on the MFA? Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. We'll adjourn the OCMFA, convene as the Oklahoma City Public Property Authority. There are 2 items. All right. Comments or questions on the PPA?
Your Honor, I have a question.
Okay.
On PPA A, is bonds be used out at the fairgrounds? And I had a question for why they were negotiated rather than bid. And secondly, does the city have any obligation in terms of these bonds? If there's any sufficient revenue at the fairgrounds for them?
There is sufficient revenue from the fairgrounds to cover the ratio, and there's a coverage ratio that we meet.
What is the coverage rate?
It's 1.5. So hopefully my financial friends will come in and help me. I think it's 1.5, but it may be 2. And the reason that it's being negotiated is because of the size of the sale. It's not big enough to go out into a full bond issue. Kenny or Craig?
Yes.
Because of the size of the sale is why we're placing it this way?
That's a part of that, and we did do an RFP process. So even though it's a negotiated sale that we'll negotiate with, as the market's changing here and as we finalize the deal, we'll negotiate that. But we did do an RFP process. We received 2 proposals. We actually received a 3rd one that was past the deadline, but did receive 2 proposals. So we did do that portion of it where they made a bid and gave us proposals on how they could, different ways to structure. We had a bid from J.P. Morgan and BOK, and so we did that part competitive, but we do it negotiated to give us more flexibility in the process and because of the size of the deal.
Who will you negotiate with?
It'll be with J.P. Morgan. The authorization today is to allow us to negotiate with J.P. Morgan.
And the coverage ratio?
It's a little over 1, right?
The fairgrounds portion will be more than a 1. These are also secured by that. The other 411s, the Convention and Visitors Bureau portion, that's how those bonds are structured, so it provides over a 1.5 coverage ratio.
Essentially because the other portion of the hotel motel tax is used to cover that.
Exactly right.
Is also pledged toward that.
And that's with a very conservative estimate on our hotel tax as well.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Do we have a second on the PPA? All right, cast your votes on the PPA. Passed unanimously. Adjourn the OCPPA, convene as the Oklahoma City Environmental Assistance Trust. 1 item. All right, cast your votes on the EAT. It passed unanimously. Adjourn the OCEAT and reconvene the council meeting with the consent docket.
Second.
All right, are there any individual considerations?
Mayor, I just have a correction on 6X. It states Ward 6, but it's actually in Ward 4.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
You,
Item U. All right, go ahead and get us started with item U.
Well, first I want to acknowledge what happened last week. Last week we had what really is, I think, historic potentially for a city. We had some 40 consultants from 5, 6 different companies all come together and meet together and talk about how to coordinate all of our MAPS 3 projects, the convention center, the park, the streetcar, developing the Core to Shore. I just want to thank ADG and everyone, and David Todd and everyone who organized that. Mr. Couch has been promising that and delivered, I think, in a big way last week. I think it's historic to have that kind of coordination, and it's no longer about each project now operating in a silo. It's how do you make all these work together to maximize the economic development. And I just want to say a word about why I think we should move forward with this Populous contract, even though I've had concerns about the site and the convention center. And I know the council knows this, but this is really for the public to figure out the true impact, the true cost of these projects. It's not just, it's the capital that you put in, and then it's the amount that you spend on operations and maintenance over the years. But then it's really what's happening over the last 20 years is we have this WPA-esque program where we're making public investments in these projects, and then you get this economic development that occurs in response. Like the canal, we bought the canal, or we built the canal, and then you have some money to operate and maintain the canal, but you get this private investment around the canal. So you get this sales tax, and you get all this activity, and you get some intangibles that can't be measured, just people's happiness. So what's the true cost of the canal? It's kind of hard to measure, but it's not just the amount that you spent to build it. It's how it impacts the city and shapes the city and what kind of return on investment you get from the private sector because you made that public investment. And I think that's what's really starting to happen last week is that all these consultants are trying to get together to figure out how do we make all this work to maximize the private investment and the economic development that occurs from our public investment. And I think we're starting to really understand that a lot better. A year and a half ago, our assessment of what the economic impact of the streetcar was going to be was $163,000 and 7 jobs. I think 18 months later, we have a much better sense that it's really a much bigger economic driver than that. And so moving ahead with this Populous contract, even though I have concerns about the site, and I think there are arguments that maybe it's premature, I think that allows you to better estimate all three components of the cost. When we originally tried to figure out what the cost of the convention or what the economic impact of the convention center was going to be, we used a study by Convention Sports and Leisure in 2009. And they talked about a 3-phase, to get to the Tier 2 studies, at 3 phases. The first phase would be to build 285,000 square feet of convention center, which would cost $250 million. And then a second phase to bring it up to 425,000 square feet, which would be another $150 million. And then a hotel costing some $50 million. So altogether, a convention center, that study envisioned spending about $450 million. But the true cost would be, how does that, either 250 or if you do the $450 million, how does that impact economic development around it is the true cost. And I just don't want there to be any surprises. In June at the Convention Center Subcommittee, it became clear that we're not going to get what that study said, to get the economic impact, which they estimated about $50 million, that you would increase your convention center, the economic impact to the city from 25 million to 75 million if you went up to 285,000 square feet. But Mike Carrier told us in June that it might be more like 200,000 square feet. So I just don't want there to be any surprises later if we don't get to what we originally talked about. And he said, is the budget sufficient to do what we originally conceptualized? The answer is we won't meet the conceptual based on the budget. And then Mr. Myers told us that in a response to Mr. McDaniel's question, well, then how do we get to Tier 2 status? And he said, well, we use the $252 million to get as far down the road to Tier 2 as possible, and after that, see if there's additional money from the city, private corporations, or individuals. And then Mr. Carrier opined that you can't see if there's additional money from the private sector until the conceptual plans are done. And again, that's a reason to move forward with this contract with Populous, is to see how many square feet we can get, and then try and figure out if additional monies are needed, and if so, where would they come from. But the most important thing, I think, is to try and figure out how does this site impact economic development around it. And we had some good discussions last week. And I think that one thing to think about is, and we've brought this up before, is what happens when you put the convention center on the most expensive, most easily developable land which is the old Ford Center site. In October of 2010, Fred Hall told us that he was going to do mixed-use development there. Yeah, it would be very easy to develop. You'd have the Myriad Gardens on one side, you'd have the Boulevard, which is $100 million to the south of it, and then a $120 million park, and then the streetcar, which we know causes real estate development. And so that would be one of the easiest sites to develop and get some return on investment from our public investment. What happens when you put the convention center there and you lose that ability? So now, can you make that up somewhere else? Could you use the streetcar to develop real estate somewhere else, maybe in the Coeur d'Alene area? Or maybe you tear down the Cox Convention Center and you do your development there. But how do you, what is the cost? How do you figure out the true cost of the convention center? You have to figure out maybe what you lost by developing at that site versus other sites. And Gary has repeatedly brought up maybe the best reason for moving forward at that site, which is you get to control the development and the continuity between the two sites. So despite reservations, I think we should move forward. And again, I'm just very, very proud of what we did last week and the conversations we're having.
All right. Any other comments or questions on the consent docket? All right, we have a motion and a second, so cast your votes. Passes unanimously. Nothing on the concurrence docket today. Item 8A begins a series of items that require a separate vote. Item 8A has been deferred already till November 20th, which moves us to item 8B, a public hearing regarding dilapidated structures. Is there anyone here wishing to speak under any item listed under 8B? All right, looks like we're ready to go. Cast your votes, and it passed unanimously. Item 8C is a public hearing regarding a dilapidated structure in a historic preservation landmark district. It's a garage apartment in Ward 6. Meg?
Yeah, is there anybody here that signed up to speak on this item? I drove by and looked at it, and it looks to be in dangerous shape. It looks like it's about to collapse. It's well hidden behind a house, and the house actually is having a lot of work done on it. Have you got some pictures of it? Yeah, the house looks great, but the shed in the back looks terrible. So without anybody here to speak on it, I think it's more dangerous to the neighborhood than it is contributing, and I would recommend approving the item.
All right.
Is this, go back to that previous picture. No. Is that the garage or is that the house? It looks like the house to me.
Yeah, Pete, that's the garage.
Yeah, it's in the garage apartment. That's the garage. The house is in good shape.
I couldn't see the back of the house. I tried to drive around the back side, and you can't really see the back of the house.
The back of it's worse than
the structure on the other side, but there's
the house is fine. The back of the garage is what's bad.
Okay, I see from there. Okay.
All right. Ready to vote then on item 8C. Meg, you made a motion?
Yes, I did.
Okay, cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8D is a public hearing regarding unsecure structures. Is there anyone here wishing to speak under any item listed under 8D? All right, how about a motion then? Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8E is a second public hearing regarding the new fire station we'll be building in far southwest Oklahoma City. Is there anyone here wishing to speak on this item? All right. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8F is a revocable right-of-way use permit. It's to hold the Fall Festival in the Farm Market District on November 4th in Ward 6.
Great. Anybody here? Would you all like to speak to this? It sounds like a wonderful project. Urban Agrarian's a fantastic place. I hope everybody's had a chance to visit.
And we will need your name and address for the record.
Unless you say no.
Yeah.
And then I'll start driving.
It can be dangerous to speak too much. But no, we will need your name and address for the record, and I think we want to give you a chance to promote the event.
Burt McAnally, 311 South Line, Oklahoma City Farmers Market.
April Harrington with Urban. 1235 Southwest 2nd.
So it sounds like you're going to close off the street for the first time.
Yes.
And have some food booths and vendors and things
Yes.
there. Why don't you just tell us while you're here a little bit about Urban Agrarian, what y'all are doing?
We are, Oklahoma City's first local food hub. It is a consolidated effort between Earth Elements, Entrepreneur's Kitchen, and Urban Agrarian Local Food Distribution. We have joined forces and moved into the Farmers Market District to help get local food to the community. This festival is celebrating our 1-year anniversary. In the Entrepreneur's Kitchen, we also have 12 other food businesses that come in and prepare their foods and sell through the district, through the Urban Agrarian. And so we're just excited to kind of promote local food in this area and start to be reviving the Farmers Market District, and working with McAnally's and creating a great local food district down there.
And you sell everything, their jams and their jellies, but there's local meat.
Yeah, local meats,
Their cheeses,
produce.
pastas,
Yes.
bread, pastas.
Yes.
It's a wonderful
Yes.
place. So I would move approval of the event.
Thank you.
I might also add that this is also a celebration of the Oklahoma Food Cooperative, moving down to the Farmers Market District also. So, piece by piece, we're putting more food and foodies down there to try and revitalize it into the Farmers Market District.
Bert, there was a great article in the Sunday New York Times about an area in Brooklyn that's doing exactly this, and they've taken an old warehouse, and they've got kitchens, and they've got, all these young foodies and entrepreneurs coming in. It's made a gigantic, vibrant hub. So I think you're onto something. Great idea.
Great. Thank you.
All right, look forward to it. We're voting on item 8F1. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8F2 is a request from the Oklahoma City Thunder to get their pregame festivities underway again. It's known as Thunder Alley, and I believe we have a addendum here. Wiley, you want to explain what this is about?
Yes, I will. We were looking at the permit, and there's been a question arise among staff members about whether Thunder Alley required a noise permit in addition to. The current noise ordinance is drafted exempts organized sporting events from, is an exclusion for the noise ordinance. Question was, is Thunder Alley part of the sporting event? We believe that it is, but we've added language to the permit to make it clear that that's the finding of City Council, that the event, that Thunder Alley is part of the organized sporting event throughout, so that they don't have to go get a noise permit for every time. And then the current noise ordinance only allows them 3 permits, so it'd get real complicated, and so we think this fixes the problem.
Okay. Well, how about a motion then on the addendum here that fixes what they think might be a problem?
Let me ask a question about it. Do you have a motion? Did you say you did? I
We're
moved
talking about
approval.
the amendment right now, but go ahead.
Okay, I move the amendment. Whatever
We're good.
whatever we need
Vote on
to
the
do to
amendment.
get it forward.
All right, we're passing the amendment. Now we're voting on the revocable permit.
What's different in this permit than the one we had last time?
Other than adding the language to make it clear that
This is only
that
modified.
Thunder Alley is part of the event.
I guess I'm looking to hear changes to avoid the kind of problems that we had last time.
The activities in the alley itself are up to the team as they go forward. It's my understanding they are not proposing to show the games during the games.
Okay.
And so it's still.
I think that probably would be enough. I think that may help draw the crowd.
Well, that was the issue.
Yeah.
No, they've held these for years.
Right. I know. It just got out of hand when we got to the playoffs.
Well,
And they started showing the games during
that.
Yeah.
And so this is the same activities that they've had since inception.
Okay.
Going out there.
Well, and that's a good activity. No, I don't want to have to be thinking I'm...
Yeah, shooting hoops out there, or
Right.
moon jumps in the concerts, or whatever they have for the pregame.
So this is back to the way it was before they started showing the game.
Right. This does not preclude them from showing the games, but that's the team's call as they go
Okay.
forward.
That's good. This is good. I move approval of the whole thing.
We're voting on item
amended.
8F2. The whole thing passes. All right, on to item 8G, which is a revocable permit to hold the holiday boat parade and festival on the Oklahoma River in wards 4, 6, and 7.
Mike, do you want to speak to that?
Mike is hiding back there. Mike, come on up.
I also know however. This is our 8th annual holiday parade. We cannot do it without the support of the city and a number of city departments. We're proud of the fact that it's probably the largest free holiday event, not only in Oklahoma City, but in the state. And so we just encourage everyone to come out Friday, November 23rd, Wiley Post Park in the Boathouse District for the 8th annual Oklahoma City Holiday Parade. And again, Mayor, thanks for all the support we receive from the city.
It's good event. How about a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
All right, cast your votes. Thanks, Mike. Passes unanimously. On to item 8H, this is a resolution approving a MAPS 3 sidewalk master plan, and we've had conversations with each of the council, and I think people should be encouraged that we're planning to move forward with the concept of taking some money from the general fund to continue to build out the MAPS 3 sidewalk plan, and eventually, I'd like to think this council and future councils will finish that thing out.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. David Todd with the MAPS office. I have a quick presentation here for this master plan. Take us just a second to get it started. As I said, this is for the MAPS 3 Sidewalk Master Plan. This master plan comes to you from the Trails and Sidewalks Subcommittee and through the Citizens Advisory Board through the MAPS 3 program. You previously saw it, if you remember, a couple months ago. There were some concerns. You sent it back to the subcommittee, and the subcommittee has reevaluated it. It's essentially the same, but we've refined some of the estimate components of it. Just to give you a little background, if you'll recall, sidewalks are not required to be built for developments for approximately 50 years, and the absence of attention will take us some time to recover. So there's a lot of sidewalks that need to be done in Oklahoma City. Current requirements, the sidewalks are built with residential development that's interior to the residential development, and then also for the arterial streets. And then also commercial and office development requires new sidewalks, and that's typically on your arterial streets or at the front of the residential areas on the collector streets. Other sources of sidewalks are private development, as I just mentioned. The 2007 bond projects included $68 million for sidewalks, and that's ongoing. And then there's federally funded sidewalk projects. Real quick on the budget, how we got to the 6.8, you can see it's the 9.190 budget for the program itself, and then you can see it's broken into two phases. The construction line items there of $3.27 million on phase 1, and then $3,574,000 in phase 2, gives us a total of $9,190,000 for the program itself, but then the total construction is $6,844,000. So we have $6.8 million to actually construct sidewalks. This is the criteria that the subcommittee used. There were various items in this that were used to rank the sidewalks: proximity to schools, connectivity to schools, proximity to transit. I won't read them all, but these are some of the aspects that were looked at to rank them. And then there was a second pass that included constructability, which means how easy is this one to construct? Will it cost too much to construct this as opposed to another one? The connection, the right-of-way issues, and then the utility issues. This was put into a spreadsheet, and numbers were created that ranked each alignment. And this is the result of that criteria. So in the report, you have copies. This is just a piece of one of the spreadsheets. But this is probably the most important part of the report, because it gives you the results. On the right-hand side, in the yellow, you can see where the actual ranking is. And then you have the location of the street on the left, and then where it begins and where it ends. So, for instance, halfway down there is May Avenue from Northwest 36th to Northwest 50th. And then it notes that Monroe Elementary is impacted there. It's on the east side of the street. Now, this is the main change between the last report and this report. There's two columns there. There's a column that estimates the cost of the sidewalk for that alignment at $50 a foot, and there's a line there that estimates it at $35 per foot. Since we're dealing with estimates, the $50 per foot is the average the average of all the bids that we've seen in recent past. The $35 range is the average of all the low bids. So what we've developed is a range of bids of where we think that the sidewalks would come in. So instead of giving us a definite line, we've got more of a range. So that gives us a little more to work with. Now, City Clerk has some revisions.
I've distributed.
Okay, so you should have the revisions. In the week since we initially submitted this, we've gone over one of the alignments, and one of them is in Ward 7, Councilman Kelly's 63rd Street. Intuitively, we all knew that there's a lot of kids there on Millwood, but we couldn't really understand why it wasn't ranking higher. But the key became that when you take mile at a time, if you take 63rd from Broadway to Kelly, there's a park and there's some neighborhoods, and it ranked kind of mid in the program. And then when you move over to the next mile from Kelly to M.L. King, again, it ranks in the mid part of the program because there's a school and there's some neighborhoods. But the key was that connectivity, one of the criteria that I had on there. So if you grab those 2 miles and link them together, it really boosted its rating. So that 63rd Street rating has moved from 61st to 23rd in the rankings. Now, notice we've done that with several of the alignments. There's runs down Shields that go for 3 miles because of connectivity with certain things. There's a couple of places, I believe, on Penn. There's a piece of 44th Street that we linked from I-35 to Shields, I believe. So it's not something that we haven't done in here, linking these miles together because of the connectivity. So that's the change that you have with you. And again, here's the summary of the estimates that I explained, the $50 per foot and the $35 per foot, and that gives us the range. So the estimate range gives us between 25.8 to 36.5 miles of sidewalk.
David, I think it's important to point out as we go forward, that there was a larger number that was talked about earlier, and why aren't we at that larger number? And I think there's 2 predominant reasons. Is one, the original estimate was based upon a 4-foot sidewalk, and one of the first things that the subcommittee looked at and decided was it really should be a 5-foot sidewalk. And that's not a wrong decision. It's you can do it either way, but that's a better quality sidewalk, but that knocked 20% off at the top on that. And the estimates, as you know, we don't do plans before we do MAPS 3, so we took some areas where we'd put some sidewalks in, primarily along section line roads out in Ward 8, where we were running pretty straight stretches of land. Well, a lot of these sidewalks we're putting in are in areas where there's more driveways. And the driveways are expensive because to meet ADA requirements, you just can't come up to you just can't say there's an existing driveway here and you build your sidewalk to each side of it and quit. That doesn't work. That doesn't meet ADA requirements. You've actually got to remove part of the sidewalk out to meet those requirements, or not the sidewalk, the driveway out to meet those requirements, and then you've got to go up and down to meet a section of the driveway, and so that brought up the prices quite a bit too. And so I think those are probably the 2 factors that push the cost estimates up.
Well, I have a comment about that, and a comment also about the estimates. First of all, those driveways were there when we put MAPS 3 out for a vote. They didn't arise afterwards.
That's correct.
We talked about doing 70 miles of sidewalks. We didn't talk about, or we'll do less than 70 miles because there are driveways there. We talked about doing 70 miles of sidewalks. I think we've got an obligation to find a way to do the 70 miles that we promised, whatever it takes to do that. That's what that contingency fund's for. We're making a stab at it by using some of the fund balance, but I don't know that we ought to use the fund balance for that. There's a contingency fund in MAPS 3 that I think we ought to look at. Second, that's just a comment, but I think that we have an obligation to do that. As I said earlier, if the convention center came in at 60 or 40% of what we're only going to build 40% of the convention center, we'd have the whole MAPS advisory committee down here telling us to raid the contingency fund to build the convention center. And I think we have an obligation. That's a concrete, literally concrete promise that we made to do 70 miles. We didn't do 70 miles maybe. We said 70 miles. I mean, so I think turning our back on that is a mistake, a gross mistake. Secondly, then I have a question about this. On the cost estimate page, the high estimate is the average bid history. Is that the average bid made on sidewalks, regardless of whether they were accepted or not? That's just the average of the bids?
Yes, sir.
The low estimate is the average bid that was accepted, I guess. Then.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And we're now, I'm not sure the relevance of that, David.
Well, because we didn't want to come in and just do the $50 per foot and look like we're coming in way short, but we also didn't want to come in with the other number and call that good. So we're trying to give you a range of where we think the estimates will come in.
The fact of the matter is, we never put a project out like this, quite like this, where we put out a bunch of sidewalks. They've always been a sundry to another project. And so we think that potentially, by doing it this way, with a focus just on the sidewalk, it may drive the price down. But we don't have any history on that. So that's, we think.
Well, it doesn't have to drive the price down to do it at $35 a foot, because that's what the price has been.
Yes. That's correct.
So we think it may go lower than $35 a foot? Is that what we're saying?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying we don't.
Oh, you hope. That's what your hope is.
We don't have history on that.
Okay.
That's the hope.
But the 2007 bond sidewalks, are those 4 foot or 5 foot?
The bond projects will be 5 foot if the sidewalk is away from the curb. If the sidewalk is against the curb, it's 6 foot.
But if it's in a residential area.
If it's in a residential area, it'd be 4 foot. Right.
But so in 2007, we decided we were going to build 5 foot and 6 foot sidewalks. So why in MAPS 3 did we decide we were going to have 4 foot sidewalks?
I don't know if that's how the estimate was done. I'm just saying that's what will be required, is 5 foot and 6 on the arterials.
But when we were coming up with our estimate, we're going to get 70 miles, we based it on 4 foot sidewalks. Why did we do that when our 2007 bond sidewalks were 5 and 6 feet?
Arterial ones, the residential ones were 4. We probably should have done 5 foot.
David, when you're looking at these figures that, and this $35 a foot, is there any comparison to the stimulus money that the city received when we started these sidewalks that many people refer to as sidewalks to nowhere, in reference to the dimension and in reference to the bids that was received and the contracts that was let for those sidewalks? Is there any comparison to the cost factor for what's being proposed now that was part of those funds, that you drive around Oklahoma City and you see a little portion of a sidewalk that runs into a ditch and that's the end of it?
I think those, again, were done in conjunction with other projects, and this is kind of a different animal. So those ran higher because of the fact that they were, a contractor has to go to one area and work at a corner and take out a corner, and that's more non-productive work. That's a higher cost work doing that than just going and laying ribbons of sidewalks.
So it had nothing to do with using any of that information in reference to...
Yes, we looked at that, but we're not sure how applicable it is because of the way those were constructed, and we're not sure how applicable that is to what we're doing with this project.
And I'm not suggesting that we do this, but am I hearing that if we were to choose to lay these sidewalks in areas where we were just laying long ribbons of them, we might get closer to the 70
that's right.
miles?
That's correct. So that's now.
So we're making a choice here to say we'd rather have, at the moment, fewer miles in
higher density areas,
more logical areas than just laying them out and getting, I mean,
that's correct.
We could buy 70 miles and fill our promise.
Say that again.
I think we could buy 70 miles of sidewalk and fulfill our promise if we laid them in just areas where all you had to do was just go flat and run a ribbon of sidewalk, but that doesn't
That
But
doesn't
we
mean-
showed
That doesn't help
this-
us.
The map is virtually the map that we talked about before.
But I'm not
This is
talking
not
about-
a new map.
Right, I'm not talking about the map at all. I'm just saying, if we just, I think this is what I heard, is that if we just wanted to lay 70 miles of sidewalk, to say we laid 70 miles of sidewalk, we probably could do that within our budget. But that's not what we're trying to
If you want to
do.
make them 2 foot wide, you could, but, I mean, I think we might as well acknowledge we missed it and go and try to fix it rather than try to dance with it. As far as I'm concerned, we missed it. We promised 70 miles of sidewalks, we showed a map where they were going to be, and we're going to build 35 at best. I think we've got an obligation to try to fix it. It's not a, I think we make more of the problem by not trying to fix it and trying to defend doing 35 than we do by trying to find a way to fix it. If you can build 35 for $6 million, $6 million is just a scratch on the side of the contingency fund. Why don't we just go ahead and build what we promised? And not, I think we...
Well, I'll answer your question. My opinion is that I think you may ultimately be right. I think maybe the council should use contingency money to fulfill it. But I just don't think we should do it here in year 3 of the collection. This is a lot of work for people. Let's get these sidewalks in. Let's learn along the way. I don't think we need to start spending contingency money today to fulfill it. But a year from now, 5 years from now,
Okay, that's fine.
I would suggest the council do that.
If that's a fair answer, and I'm satisfied with that.
I have a question. David, I've got a figure 6 and a figure 7 map.
Yes, sir.
And it's got green and red lines on it. What's the difference?
Okay, continuing on, the red lines are the sidewalks that fall within the range of the $50 per foot estimate. And then the green ones are the continuation. If the bids come in at $35 a foot, that's the additional projects that we estimate will be available to be built. So that's kind of the band that I was talking about. That's the ones that are out there beyond that high estimate. So then if you go on to the next slide, you'll see in the turquoise, which is kind of hard to see here, but the turquoise represents all the sidewalks that will be built with the bond program, with the arterial streets that are being done. And what also isn't shown on here is, I believe it's 31 square miles of areas that will receive sidewalks with the residential program that we talked about previously. So that's not shown on there either. So there's a lot of sidewalks coming in the near years.
Okay, you mentioned the GEO bond projects, and I'm a little confused about the answer that I heard a minute ago. Will those be our new standard 5 feet sidewalks and 6 feet sidewalks?
Those are our standards on arterials now. 4 feet is what we're putting in residential areas. As you recall, we're doing a lot of interior works and different section lines. When we do those, we've been putting 4-foot sidewalks in.
Right, the 5-foot
Why 4
sidewalks.
feet? Why are the 4-foot sidewalks being put in? I mean, it saves money, I understand that, but
4-foot sidewalks is our standard subdivision, residential subdivision.
that's a
regs.
good answer, but doesn't get to the heart of the matter. Why did we pick 4 feet? I mean, 2 people walking side by side can hardly walk on a 4-foot sidewalk. And if we put in sidewalks that are useless, we discourage the whole process. And I think we need to rethink that residential sidewalk issue. I know it's going to cost more money, but if we put in something that's 4 feet that's not used, then we've wasted our money.
Can you bring some pictures to us and let us see what a 4-foot sidewalk looks like in actual?
I can. I know that whenever you put a 5-foot sidewalk in a subdivision, it starts making that area between the curb and the sidewalk really small, and people like a little more to mow and take care of it, and more green space than just the concrete. But I can certainly do that.
Okay.
David, I don't want to belabor this, but there are some areas that I still have some very serious concerns about. And when we look at the factors that was taken into consideration, and especially the schools, there's a school in Ward 7. It's in the North Highlands, as a matter of fact. And there's been 2 incidents here within the last 4 months in which a student was hit by a vehicle on the way to school. And there's no sidewalks that have a real connection to the students and the traffic, and especially on Robinson that goes to the school. Now, It is one of the new MAPS projects recently completed in a very highly densified neighborhood. And if we are looking at these, the connectors that school, population, and whatever else they were considering, I think the two things that in some of these areas, if you look at the school, if you look at the neighborhood, and the lack of sidewalks, it definitely should be one of the higher prioritized areas to consider as far as the sidewalks, and I don't see that it's on the map. But then I see Memorial Road to Eastern Avenue and Kelly Avenue, and I'm sometimes, just kind of puzzled as to these areas that were selected, that in many of these are just wide open spaces, and there's really not a whole lot that connects for the real use of the sidewalk for, if we're looking at the amount of money that we have and the challenge is the number of miles that we're trying to complete. I just really think that there was, when I look at this, it just don't seem like that this was vetted to the best degree in reference to where the best benefit at the present time. If the mayor says that, well, maybe we could do this, and go to the contingency fund, in years to come. But would we not be better served if we took what money we have now and serve the best and give it to the areas where we have the most population, where we more than likely have the best use and the best need as it relates to schools and connecting to the schools and the neighborhoods.
Councilman, I understand what you're saying, and I can't answer to one specific site because I don't have all 131 of these memorized, but unfortunately there's a whole lot of alignments in this report that need it and have the same issues, and I've even experienced times when I'm be driving and looking and see what we call the desired pass, the dirt pass, and think in my mind, well, this looks like this is really used, I'm going to go check, and then, find out it's 30, 40 down the list, and so you go look at the others. There's just a lot of need out there.
For example, Councilman, the Memorial Road one you referenced is because that was done adjacent to a bond project, which was our policy to do that when we had a bond project to do the sidewalks adjacent to it. So that's why the ones were Memorial. That wasn't a MAPS 3 project. That was one that was done because of a bond project and the criteria used for that.
Well, and I would just like to make one other comment, and I know this is not for passing an ordinance or a policy, but I would like for this to be taken into serious consideration, that as we go forward with these sidewalks, that we make sure that there's two things that don't ever happen. Number one, these benches will not be in the middle of the sidewalk, and utility poles will not be in the middle of the sidewalk. And there are some areas where, the use of the sidewalk is almost impossible because you've got all these, benches that's sitting in the middle of the sidewalk or a utility pole in some areas.
I understand.
Okay. All right. Yeah, Larry?
David, I know you don't have an answer for this right now, but I'd like an answer coming up if I could. What I'm assuming is on the back of the book where we have all these rankings of all these different streets, that these are candidates eventually for sidewalks, maybe not in phase 1 or even phase 2.
That's right.
Okay, and one of the streets that's listed there is Reno Avenue. And in different sections on Reno Avenue, basically all the way from Council down to May Avenue, it calls eventually for a sidewalk to be put in on Reno. And of course that is very clearly an arterial street, and I think I've figured out in my own mind where I was off. Then there's another stretch of road in Ward 3 between Northwest 23rd and Northwest 36th on a street called Ann Arbor. And Ann Arbor is not a section line road, but it is and Jim, what do you call that kind of a street? A collector?
Well, it's a major collector.
A major collector. And there is on that street an elementary school right on the street. And of course that doesn't appear anywhere on our priority list for sidewalks. And I suspect that might be the problem that Skip is having over there with North Highland, that it doesn't fit on an arterial street. Is there a way, without ruining the whole logic of the program, to allow for this type of possible inconsistency to be factored in future to determine that, hey, maybe we need a sidewalk more where there's an elementary school with 600 kids than we do along Reno, where right now basically nobody is walking?
Okay.
So that's,
I'll check into that.
thank you, sir.
Yeah, can I, on Classen, weighted rank number 11, help me understand where the beginning and end, it says the beginning is 34th to 35th and the end is 38th to 49th. What is that?
I think that's a mid-block, or it's, the sidewalk begins somewhere between 34th and 35th.
I see. And
then goes between,
well, 38th to 49th.
I think that's probably supposed to be 38th, 39th, or 48th.
That's probably tied into an existing sidewalk at that
It is.
location.
So it starts somewhere between 34th and 35th and goes up to 49th?
Yes, sir. That's what it appears. But it would be mid-block. It would be mid-block stuff that connects to existing sidewalks. This is Gary Nolan with Smith Roberts. He can give you a little more detail.
It's a connection. It's kind of a two-segment part from 34th to 38th, and then there's an existing sidewalk we connect, and it starts again. It goes on. Let me see, number 11.
Okay.
It goes from 34th to 35th, and then it starts back up from 38th to 49th. It's just kind of a...
I see. It skips 35th.
There's a piece that's in there existing, and we're just connecting it.
Okay.
So the goal is to have a continuous through there,
sidewalk.
blending new and the existing infrastructure that's there.
So I want to just make just a plea to really coordinate with our transit department as we start moving forward. Right now, we're starting a study to kind of look at our bus routes, and those may change. Where, I know that one of the factors was proximity to transit, but that may change in the months and years to come as we get that study in. Right now, we don't have stop data, and that's one of the most important things that we'll gain from that study. Right now, we don't know where people are getting on and off the buses. So as that data comes in and we start to learn where people are getting on and off our buses, I would hope that you could coordinate with our transit department and really start to think about where the bus shelters would go on these sidewalks, and then maximizing or coordinating the sidewalk interface with that footprint.
As we go along, I can get in touch with Rick Kane and make sure we're still on the same page.
Okay. And then just a final comment about, what Pete was talking about, shortfalls. I mean, I just want to, you mentioned the convention center, and I just want to reiterate what I was saying before, which is that we're not building potentially the convention center that we talked about during MAPS 3. I mean, there's a shortfall in multiple projects. We talked about 285,000 square feet, and our study said that you need 285,000 square feet to increase your economic impact from $25 million a year to $75 million a year. Well, we're talking about numbers like 200,000 square feet. That's basically 2/3 of what we talked about during the MAPS 3 campaign. So if our policy is we're going to go into contingency or come up with funds to get up to what we promised during MAPS 3, for 10 million sidewalks, that's one thing. For a convention center, when you're only building 2/3, that's something quite different. And so we'll have to come up with a policy for how to deal with these shortfalls, which looks like it's going to occur in multiple projects.
Just I want to just the committee or the consultants, when they were going through this process and the factors that they took into consideration, did they look at all of the schools in the Oklahoma City area as it relates to the schools and the neighborhoods?
It started more with the streets, as far as 4-lane arterial streets, and then looked and checked to see what schools were nearby. So we didn't start with the schools, we started with the streets, if that makes any sense. But the schools were a part of the criteria. They were a major portion of the criteria.
Well, it just seems like to me that probably the one population that is going to be more and benefit the most from the sidewalks are the children. And 90% of the time, the children are going to be benefiting if they're going to school or if they're going to a playground. And to have a safe passage from their neighborhood to the school or to the playground. And that's been a part of America since day one, since there were people born, and having playgrounds and having schools is having a safe passage to get there and to come back home in a safe way. And I just think that those are two areas that really need to be looked at again as it relates to some parts of this whole project, to make sure that we're benefiting someone that actually needs to benefit, based upon the time frame and based upon the money that we have right now. And that's one of my main concerns about this, is that everybody would like to have a lot of sidewalks, I think, but when you look at the total geographical area of Oklahoma City, you could justify in some degree and say, well, you could take May Avenue, and we could say, well, from 36th Street to 50th Street, we're going to put sidewalks. But if you drive down May Avenue and stand on the street corner 7 days a week, I guarantee you can almost count the number of people that are walking in that area, on either side, the west side or the east side. But I can take you to some places where grass don't grow. And the reason why grass don't grow is because people are challenged to try to get from point A to point B and walking in that terrain, and there's no sidewalks. Or, like the consultant said a few minutes ago, I think we should also take into consideration those sidewalks to nowhere that was put in, and to try to see if we can connect those sidewalks to wherever they were supposed to be from the beginning. And I just, because otherwise we're just going to leave those out there as a gap, and people will continue to say, where's this going to, why did it stop right here? When in fact it had to have been some reason, some justification to start the sidewalk there. I would think that they would have taken into consideration that there was, some traffic, some foot traffic there, and where they stopped, for whatever reason they stopped, it would tend to be at least a beginning justification to continue that to a point of destination. So I'm grateful for whatever I can get from my citizens in Ward 7, but I still don't think that it's a total, balance as it relates to the real need of the citizens as the city as a whole, And I think we're going to get ourselves in a situation where citizens may not think that we really did the best for the money that we asked for, and from the size of the sidewalks to the real connectability to the need in the various communities. And I would just think that we could do a better,
All right, well, item 8H is to approve the plan. Ready to go? Yes. Comments or questions?
Hal McKnight.
Oh, didn't see that. We have one citizen who has signed up to speak. Hal McKnight is...
Yeah, and as Hal's coming up, I do want to point out there's a city manager report on that is related to this item. And the city manager report is basically a resolution from the Sidewalk and Trail Subcommittee that, says they recommend approval of this, but they've also requested that the council consider putting more money into sidewalks.
Hal, you are on the subcommittee for MAPS 3. You want to come forward?
Good morning. My name's Hal McKnight. I'm on the MAPS 3 subcommittee for trails and sidewalks. And MAPS 3 is both an investment into our economy as well as our health and wellness. Unfortunately, our city does not test very well in national surveys. And we do know that the more trails, the more sidewalks there are, the safer city that we have and the more healthy city that we have. And the original numbers, we were going to take $9 million and hopefully construct 70 miles of sidewalks. We're now looking at, because of increased cost, about half that amount. And our subcommittee is unanimous in trying to ask the City Council for any ways that we can get additional funding to build the 70 miles of sidewalk. And I really think it's a time of the essence. As Councilman Kelly is talking about, there's a safety concern in people walking in our cities. We haven't built any sidewalks, basically, to my understanding, since 1960. I mean, this is, the great thing about this is, because of the study that has been done on sidewalks, because of MAPS 3, we're realizing the great need for sidewalks. And other cities are way ahead of us in a lot of ways on this. But I feel that it's really essential, and through this master plan, we have been able to identify and prioritize, and I think it's an ongoing process, where sidewalks need to be. I mean, if we look at our city, right there, it's a huge surface area. So that's a problem. We only have $9 million from MAPS 3 to work with. I think for future citizens and present citizens, we would appreciate any efforts the council can be in reaching this 70 miles of sidewalks as quickly as possible, and then keeping that momentum going. I also think there's an obligation to the voters of this city and the supporters of MAPS 3 and future MAPS projects to hit that 70-mile mark as quickly as possible. Any questions?
Al, thanks.
Thank you.
We have a motion and a second to approve the Sidewalk Master Plan report. Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8I is a resolution that I think Francis is going to have some input into. What is this about?
Yes, Mayor and Council, Council adopted the Records Retention Manual in April of 2011, and there are now 5 departments that are requesting amendments to their records that they possess in their department. The first is the Municipal Counselor's Office, and they're requesting to lower their retention period for their litigation case files and their criminal justice records. And then the Personnel Department is requesting the employee benefit election files, those years be reduced to 6 years. And then the Fire Department, on their investigation reports, they're just asking that the non-fatality incident reports can be destroyed after 10 years, but the fatality incidents will remain permanent. And then the City Clerk's Office is asking for the oaths of office to be placed in the retention schedule.
Okay.
And that's it. If you have any questions.
Clear as mud. How about a motion? Cast your votes. Passes unanimously. Thank you, Francis. Item 8J is a companion item to that fairgrounds issue that we dealt with earlier. Have a motion? Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8K, I understand we do not need executive session?
Correct.
How about a motion then? Cast your votes. Passed unanimously. Item 8L, I understand we do need executive session.
Yes.
All right. Cast your votes to move item 8L into executive session. It passed unanimously. Item 8M, I understand we do not need executive session.
That's correct.
Motion to strike. Second. Cast your votes. Item is struck. Item 8N, let's see. We have good news to report.
We do not need executive session, but I do want to report that we do have tentative agreements with both AFSCME and FOP, and they're looking to send that to their membership independently within the next few days, and we hope to have those adopted for November 13th. We hope to have those upon approval of their membership and bring those bills back on the 13th. So that's news since last time we met.
All right. We have a second on the motion to strike. Cast your votes on 8N. Passed unanimously. Item 8O is claims recommended for denial. Is there anyone here wishing to speak on any item listed under 8O? All right. How about a motion? Cast your votes. It passes unanimously. Item 9 is claims recommended for approval. Cast your votes on item 9. It passed unanimously. Item 10 is items from council. Pat, you want to get us started?
Nothing this morning, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, Skip?
Nothing, Mayor.
Meg?
Just a couple quick things. I'd like to kind of share Councilman Shahid's comments and thank the city manager for gathering all of our consultants together. It really was a terrific step forward, and I think good things will come from that. I'd like to just congratulate the Gatewood neighborhood. They had their house tour on Sunday, and hope it was a big success. And a third item, Jim, that has come up a number of times, but that 10th Street Railroad crossing is just getting worse and worse.
It is.
We just don't seem to be able to get any help, and we need a plea for...
I'll get you an update. We've been working with BNSF on that, and I'll get you an update of where we're at.
Do we have any
noise?
No, this is the roughness. If you've driven over it, you'll...
I've not.
It's a terrible crossing. Do we have any opportunity to take it to the corporation? They regulate the railroads as well?
You know, there's been some progress on it, and I know the attorneys have been involved as to it, and I don't know exactly where we're at on it right now, but let me check with the attorney's office.
It's moving at glacial speed right now.
I'm sorry?
And if you have the opportunity to check, I'd like to add 8th Street to that list. That one is just as bad, probably doesn't get quite as much traffic, but I've got photographs of oil tracks on both sides of the street from the train track where people have bottomed out and done damage to their vehicles. So that one's 8th Street.
While you checking, Mayor, Mr. Manager, could you also find out about the quiet zone, too?
All right.
I figured since you're talking to the railroad people, you supposed to...
Yeah. We'll just shut down the railroad at 10th. How's that? That'll resolve the issue quickly. I bet. All right, David?
Your Honor, thank you. I do have a question that maybe it's a policy issue. I'm not sure, but it seems to me, and maybe I'm just incorrect in my understanding, but from a zoning requirement, in a more urban setting, we have a buffer requirement that says, for example, if a new development's going to come in close to another development, we want some buffering as far as the size of the houses, things like that, to make it more suitable as far as a new neighborhood coming in. But if it's in an area that's zoned agriculture, that buffering requirement is not in existence. That's my question. And if that's the case, I'm wondering, because it seems like that issue may have came up last week in Councilman White's zoning case, and it seemed like with Councilman Ryan several weeks ago, a situation came up like that. If it's a traditional agricultural area where you've got a 160-acre farm, you know, I can understand that it doesn't make sense to have a buffering requirement. But when you have homes with, say, as little as 5 acres, I think that qualifies as agriculture. And it would seem like those types of developments need some kind of buffering requirement, even though they're zoned agriculture. And so that's my question, if the planning or the department could look into that question and see if it makes sense. Maybe I'm missing something, and maybe Mr. Tiener could correct me.
I think the primary difference in AA, we have larger setbacks because you have a minimum of 5-acre tracts. And so when you're in an urban setting, the lots are smaller, the setbacks are smaller, excuse me. And so we've decided that if the lots are, you know, significantly smaller, there's I think it's 75%. But in the rural areas, you don't have that because you have larger setbacks by code and you have larger lots by code.
Right.
So,
well, my question is, though, shouldn't a development that may be zoned as agriculture, made up of 5+ acre lots, shouldn't it have the same kind of protection that a more urban area would have as far as a buffering requirement of any new developments that would come up adjoining it?
So you're talking where we have transitions between the rural areas and the urban areas coming in?
Yes.
We can look at that and see, and talk with staff and see if there's something that we could come up with.
Because in Ward 5, for example, we don't have the same kind of open spaces that may exist, say, in Ward 4, where there's very large areas of open spaces. In Ward 5, though, it's not uncommon to have developments of 5+ acres, and I guess that area is zoned as agriculture, and yet many of those homes are very large, and they'd like some protection of any future development that comes in right beside them, not just being made up of 800 square foot homes right beside them.
And another part of that issue is that when we do an urban density, you're paying for the water and sewer line extensions and the streets that, to recoup your money, you need a smaller lot. And so it's harder to require a larger lot. But we can look at something for that. And
I would like to at least look into this, and I may not be looking at something that's, says our existing policy is correct and should remain in place. But on the other hand, it does seem like homeowners that have those larger acreages should have some similar protection that more urban developments already have. Thank you.
But most of the time, as a practical matter, there is protection because we don't put R1 right up against 5-acre tracts. At least out in my area, I wouldn't vote for that. Even if the water and sewer was there, we probably wouldn't do that. The problem is that most people that move to an area where they have 5 acres or more expect that everybody else that moves there is going to have 5 acres or more on into forever. And it's difficult to accept that someone's going to move in and want to live on 2.5 acres when water comes or as the city moves out. So it's I face that a lot. Is that it's mainly the pushback from the people who live on the 5-acre tracts or larger that don't want anything smaller than they are there, no matter what, no matter how hard you try to say 2.5 would work, or it just doesn't.
No, I understand.
People don't like it. So the buffer is not even though I've tried to implement one, that case last week was a perfect example. There were smaller tracts all around that area, but those people that were right up against the 5-acre, in the 5 acres, they didn't like it. They didn't want to be buffered. They wanted other people to be on at least as big as they were and somebody else be the buffer.
Right. And I know sometimes those expectations are unrealistic, and I don't think we should accommodate those. But if there is at least some type of buffering, maybe it does make sense. So that's the only reason why I wanted to at least look into the question.
It certainly would help to have some guidelines rather than just trying to do it as, which I always try to do it, but I'm doing it based on my own idea about what a buffer ought to look like as opposed to having some guidelines. So it probably wouldn't hurt anything.
Thank you.
All right, Pete? Larry?
Yeah, just I'd like to thank publicly Kim Cooperhart and Ed DeGraffenried for their continued support to the Windsor Area Business Group. They attended the board meeting last week where the 23rd Street Streetscape project was again reviewed and discussed, and the ongoing cooperation between the city and these business people is very gratifying, and I hope we end up with a project that everybody will be pleased with. Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. Ed?
Just as I was proud of the cooperation between the consultants last week, I was very proud of a meeting we had recently on Western Avenue. We had about 100 business owners and residents. Looking at the corridor between 36th and 50th, our 2007 bond has a streetscape planned. We had Russell Klaus, the head of our planning department, Rick Kane, the head of transit, and Eric Winger, the head of public works, and they were there with Blair Humphreys from the OU School of Architecture, Institute of Quality Communities, and we talked about maybe taking an approach where we take a step back and really focus in, have all these departments working together and really focus intensely on one corridor, and try and maximize input from each and try and come up with an improved product. And I think that It was very well received. We had a couple of business owners who expressed some reservation, but otherwise it was unanimous in people wanting to move forward. I'm grateful again to Mr. Couch for making it possible to work with OU to make a semester-long course out of that corridor and study how, instead of just putting in sidewalks, trying to figure out with data, trying to figure out the behavior of pedestrians and try and figure out the behavior of transit riders, and then use that data to come up with a product where we all work together to come up. And then look, I was just very, very encouraged. We've seen Mr. Lackmeyer's run old stories about Garner Stoll and some of the conflict between planning and public works. But as I was at that meeting, I thought, Eric Winger is not Paul Brum, and Russell Klaus is not Garner Stoll, and there is increased cooperation, and it was just very, very encouraging. And I think that we can come up with better products working together. And again, I want to emphasize how important I think it is to have the transit piece working with Public Works and planning to kind of coordinate. We talked about, as part of that 2007 streetscape, putting in bus shelters. But again, until we do this study in the next couple of months, we really don't understand the stop data. We really don't understand where people are getting on and off our buses. And that really needs to be incorporated into these streetscapes, and trying to decide where we put bus shelters. I've heard that we may next week have an ordinance on bus shelters, and that maybe today's the deadline for that. I don't know that that's...
We're in the process of updating that ordinance, and I know it's on schedule to come to council in the next couple of weeks.
Okay. I want to just plead that's premature, and that we delay that. I think that, I haven't had a chance to see it or review it, so I don't know who's writing it, what's going into the ordinance, what it looks like. I haven't had a chance to put any input. But again, we're doing a bus route study, and the routes may change. Where the routes go may change. Where you put the bus shelters will certainly change. And I think you need that data before you try and do a bus shelter ordinance. I think you need to see what other vendors have out there, what's available in terms of style and cost, and what has been shown in other cities to attract ridership, whether it's clocks that show the how far away the bus is once you tie it in with your GPS systems. And how can we use this to maximize choice riders, not just those who are transit dependent, but how can bus shelters be used to get new riders onto our bus system? And I just think it's too premature. I've also asked the municipal councilor to study, what happened in Atlanta and Los Angeles when they had their lawsuits. What constituted too far of a spread between how they were treating their rail riders and how they were treating their bus riders, which then invited lawsuits in both of those cities. I'd like Kenny to have a chance to opine about the current state of our bus benches and shelters versus what we're talking about on the streetcar, and what opinion. So I think that my personal feeling is that, the advertisers, those who are in charge of our current bus benches, their primary goal, it would seem, would be to put things where they could maximize their advertising revenue. I mean, that would seem to be at the top of their priority list, whereas the city, it's to maximize our transit system, maximize our ridership. And so the goals are not necessarily parallel. And I'd really like some time to have input and study that and get all that data before we bring that ordinance to us.
One thing on that, we've done some preliminary research on that, and we'll probably get with you maybe this week or next week at the latest and discuss that with you. The Title VI limitations only come into play if you take federal funds. So if you don't take any federal funding, there's no possible lawsuit under that. It's triggered by federal funding.
Right, right. Now, we have federal funding on the bus side.
Right.
And we're applying for federal funding on the streetcar side. And that's a decision we have to make as to...
That's correct.
Right.
Gary?
Well,
Two quick comments. On the bus shelters, if I'm not mistaken, though, we don't have any money invested in the shelters, correct? Those are all put in by the private company.
That's correct.
So if we want to have some say-so in where they go and what's on them and everything else, that's probably, you're going to have to look at doing something other than that being totally private dollars, because we don't have the ability to tell them what to do with it right now. I don't know what's coming forward in the exact ordinance, but right now, that's the sole discretion of the people that are paying for them. So we need to keep that in mind, too. Since David, and I agree with your comment about the rural areas and the planning and the zoning and everything else, and since you've given that task of let's look at that, I've got one more thing for you to look at, Bob. I'm going to give you another task. And we've talked about this before, but I'm having a problem in one of my areas, but I think it'll start cropping up, and that has to do with traffic studies and signal lights in developing areas. I've got, and I'm going to say right up front, it's 23rd and Sarah Road right now. We've got a whole bunch of developers plotting a whole bunch of developments out there. Some of them are under construction, some of them are platted and not started yet, and some of them we know are coming. And when we do traffic studies, it's like what's there now and what's going to come in with your development, and how does that require a light. But what we're not looking is the big picture of how many areas around there are being platted, and how many homes are going to come in with the total amount of plats that are coming in, and how is that going to affect whether you need a light or not. And the problem we have, as I see it right now, is it's like a race to get it done so you're not the last one coming online, so that yours puts it over the brink, and all of a sudden it requires a light, and that one sole developer is tasked with putting in a light, or we're going to ask them to. Or it's going to be totally on our back to put one in. So we've talked about this and finding some way of whether you do what you might call an impact fee, or you do something so that you capture a little bit with each developer as you go along, so when all of a sudden you need that traffic signal or traffic control areas, then you have captured the ability to do that. And I'd like to get some feedback from development and planning on that, on is there a way to do that? And if we don't have a way to do that currently, what do we need to put in place so that that happens? Because I think we're going to have more and more of them where if we don't capture the big picture from the very beginning, then it's going to fall on some one or two developers at the very end. And to me, that's a little bit unfair, too. So if you'd look at that also, I'd appreciate it.
All right.
Just 10 seconds. I think Gary's right. I do think that as a policy, we should think about whether we want to take control, to have our transit department in charge of bus shelters, or just have the private sector. During that meeting on Western, Rick showed a model of what the private sector has planned, and there was a collective groan of the large majority of the 100 people. If you're starting out, you don't have the buy-in from the public, you're not going to get the choice ridership. So I think as part of the input, I think as a policy, we need to decide, is that the role of government? Pat, you've brought up, it's not the job of the public government to have weddings at golf courses, et cetera. Well, I'm not sure that it's the role of the private sector to be in charge of what your bus shelters look like. I don't think that's standard practice in the majority of cities across the country.
I have a comment about the revenue, which is obviously outstanding. And refresh my memory, Jim, we had an issue with the Oklahoma Tax Commission this month because the rebate from the sales tax holiday came in a different time period than it typically did, and it just kind of throws off some of the comparisons.
That's correct.
It made me wonder from an accounting perspective, and David, maybe you can hone in on this, if we shouldn't somehow take that sales tax rebate and note it in all of our documents, but put it back into the August numbers, because that's when it should have been collected. And the fact that we get it 2 months later, and in this case, typically it was 1 month later, but we got it 2 months later, it just feels like it's troublesome. I wonder if we could go back and just put it back into the August numbers.
Well, it wouldn't be in the August numbers. It was collected in August, but those always come in.
So it's a month late.
Yeah.
But wouldn't that be more accurate of the culture of?
It'd be more in line with accrual
So how would the private sector view, so it would be, there is substance, something, I'm not just crazy.
No.
All right, well, that's good to know.
In fact, we may ask you to come over and help us out.
Well, until this year, when we didn't get it when we thought, and I saw a quote from Edmund that they weren't even aware that they didn't get it last time, and it just throws off numbers quite a bit. I mean, from a sales tax holiday.
It's clearly something we look for at this time of year in the October check.
Right, and actually they did make an adjustment. They sent the initial check, and I think that first report we sent out, the informal report, that it didn't have it in there. For this report, it did get included. I think the initial one showed that we were growing at about 3%. Once we included that check, because they sent a follow-up, some follow-up information, that put us to the 6% growth. So it actually is in there. So we do now have consistent reporting. And I think initially in your question about, reporting it back in August when it would have really have occurred, what we do with sales tax is we treat it kind of on a cash basis, so that when we get the check is when we treat it consistently year to year. The time that we get the check is really referring back to about a month and a half back on sales. So even if we moved that piece back to August, it still wouldn't be lining up with all the sales that we got actually collected in August, because those are actually the ones we're seeing in October. So the way that we're treating it now is consistent because it's on a cash basis.
Right.
And since they made that adjustment, it corrected it.
It's like the Christmas sales. Some of that shows up in July, some of that shows up in February. Or not July, January, and some of it shows up in February.
Okay. It just seems helpful when we're talking about revenue and trends if we're not having to explain it. And so that's always kind of frustrating. We're having to defend why it's high or why it's low, and we're having to do some guesswork. And it might be somehow could be fixed. Anyway. We have citizens signed up to be heard.
Can I do a couple of city manager reports first?
City manager.
I'll be brief. One is the sales tax collections report, and as the mayor alluded to, we had another good month, and it was 3% over target, 6% over last year. But the more, I think, impressive numbers are probably the year-to-date numbers, where we're almost 6.7% over target. So they've been strong this year. And I know Mr. Ryan would be disappointed with me if I didn't point out that there are a lot of unknowns coming forward. With the election coming forward, regardless of who's elected, something's going to happen, and we don't know exactly when. And the federal budget and the uncertainty out there can certainly have an impact on our budget as we go forward.
So 6.7 over target would translate into about
10% over last year. Oh, dollars?
Year to date, it's 10% over target, 6.67% over target.
10%
so
over last year.
Is that 50, 60 million?
4 million last month over target. I think that's what I read.
Well, it's actually, 4.5 million is just sales tax, and use tax even brings it up higher than that.
So year to date, we're
6 million
50
probably.
million over target?
No, over target, we're about 6 million use and sales.
Okay.
Year to date, fiscal year.
Right.
July, August.
Right. I do also want to point out there's the jail state cost recovery program report that's in your document. Mr. Davis, I see is in the audience. I assume to respond to any questions along that. That program's been in place now for several years and has performed quite well for us. And then the Total Care annual renewal update is in there. And again, that program has worked very well since inception. The numbers of our renewals are holding very strong. I do want to point out, though, that we set the rate several years back at $265 a month, and as costs have gone up, we started out in the black, and now we're a little bit in the red on that. But we're okay because we had some higher revenues in the earlier years on that. So as we go forward, that's probably going to have to be adjusted this next fiscal year, and we'll take a look and give you some options on how to do that. But it's a $365 right now, and it should be about $392, so about a quarter, 27 cents more.
Do we have enough history to kind of put in some sort of locked slight increase as opposed to coming in?
We certainly do, but one of the key factors, as I know that Councilman Shadid and Councilman Mars know off of the AMSA board, is the fact that there is a renewal contract coming forward, and that's going to have an impact on the cost. So I think we need to get that in place and then take a look at the numbers as we go forward. You're correct, we could do that, and we do have some good history.
Yeah, the contractor, the RFP for the contractor is out, so when we see what kind of contract is going to be called for, determine the expenses for the program, hopefully it won't grow either at all or that much, but...
My history with those kind of slight increases, our citizens prefer a slight bump every year as opposed to a 10% bump every third year, for instance.
And I will say that the city of Tulsa has raised theirs since we've raised ours. So, I mean, they're going along. But they didn't initially put the dollars in there that built up the reserve that's paid for as we're doing this year. So we've been able to capture that, and that's what was explained we were going to do in the very beginning, and it's worked well so far. But it won't go another year without doing something on it. So, and whether we determine at that point, do we want to do just enough every year to increase it, or do we want to, do something else? I don't know.
I was about to say before you said that to do it a slight amount every year, that how much I like the idea of doing it the way we did it, where we put a larger increase in and used it as a rate stabilization fund and didn't have an increase every year.
Well, it sounds like we've got a great policy discussion.
Certainly that leads me to think that we ought to have options when we do it, because this has seemed to me to be a good way to do it as opposed to the annual increase thing.
People don't like 10% bumps.
Yeah, I understand. But people don't like tax increases at all, generally.
Yeah, that's well put.
Well, and the other thing about the report that I want to note is that the citizens' apparent happiness with the program, or at least acknowledge that we lost some that were in the program, and we gained some that were out and came back into the program. So our net change was not all that great, less than 10%.
Like 150 people or something.
Less than 1/10 of 1%.
Okay, so it's I think it's indicative of the
How does
at least acceptance of the program out there.
How did that compare with what Tulsa's done?
That I couldn't tell you, but I know they've had more change than we have.
Yeah. I was very impressed with just losing less than 1% in the renewal period. I think that's another reason we did the rate stabilization thing, when I recall, is because we needed a period of time to know how many people would opt out and how the system would work. So that's an argument that made it a good idea the first time, but it might not make it a good idea going forward. So
actually,
I'm trying to cut the baby in half with the mayor here.
The net change was 0.1% on it, so it's a very, very small.
Right.
All right.
That's all I had, sir.
All right. Citizens to be heard. Kevin Cox. Morning, Kevin. Always good to see you. We'll need your name and address for the record.
Thank you, sir. Kevin Cox. I live at 5300 North Lottie Avenue, but my parents, who are still living, father's 87, my mother's 85, and we built a house, our family built a house at 6601 St. Bernard Lane better than 50 years ago. So I'm here to stand about the wildfires we had the summer before last. And if I can, Mr. Mayor, I would like our leader to speak first, because I have two issues, and I understand we just have 3 minutes. So it's not like the legislature where somebody could yield to me. But if one or two of the others could speak, I'd like to also speak, but I'd like to yield at this time.
Okay, so we have Jerry and Christina that have signed up.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sure.
Good morning.
Good morning.
As Mr. Cox was saying,
Jerry, I'll need your name and address for the record.
Jerry Michael Bowen, 5640 Oakwood, Spencer, Oklahoma.
Okay.
We came here for about the wildfires. Last year they said they had estimated that in 2011 it was took $5 million to exhaust a single wildfire that burned 40,000 acres in southwest Oklahoma. Y'all probably already know that. But see, we live in Harrison Addition right off 63rd and Sooner Road. For a whole year we've been getting councilmen and county people, from Mike Shelton to Ms. Johnson to Mr. Kelly to come out, and they tell us the same thing over and over again. They want to help us, but they can't help us. because we're in the rural department and...
What are you looking for us to do? What are you looking for us to do?
Help.
I mean, what type of help?
Assistance. What we want to do as a community, we want to go and try to cut some of them trees down, take care of the side of the roads, clean up around the neighborhood and people's homes, and we need the city to give us some assistance, even if it's nothing but bringing in, trucks to haul off the trees and stuff, or even or take some of the cedar trees down. We can cut them and do them. We just need some assistance. So far, we've been calling the Action Center for a whole year. They haven't cut the side of the road.
Well, I don't know that we have a whole lot of experience about fire prevention like this. Does the state handle stuff like this, or can they give us some advice on how? Because if there's something we can do to keep this from happening.
There is something that's just happened. The legislature passed a law that now permits governmental entities to go on private property and remove red cedar trees.
Yeah, we read about that.
But that wasn't there a year ago or 2 years ago. That's brand new law. One of the things we've looked at through the Water Trust is the purchase of a machine that would do that. We're talking about removing red cedar trees around, in an area around Lake Hefner, kind of as an experimental thing. But we've talked seriously about the purchase of a machine through the Water Trust. Now, those machines are not that expensive, as I understand it. We've been offered the loan of one to try this experiment. I think Chesapeake has offered to loan us a machine that they have. I think if that works out, I think the city would be remiss not to purchase those and start removing red cedars wherever we find them, now that it's legal to do that. I mean, it'd be just red cedars alone would make a huge difference in the fire prevention. And because I have an area I live just like where you do, except about 10 miles south or 20. And so if you could just take the red cedars out, it'd be a huge difference in the. But I think we're just now able to do that. That's just happened. I think I don't remember when the law became effective, but it was passed this session, and I think it may not be effective until this Friday. I'm not quite sure, but
Jerry, I cut you off. You want to go ahead?
Yeah, we seen how the council board got together and put that new fire station out on Hallback Road. And what we loved about it was y'all didn't have city water hooked up to it. What they did was they put a pump there and with a tank. Our church, we getting ready to rebuild, we got a tank, and we were thinking about doing the same thing. But, we wanted information and assistance on doing it the right way. We talked to Chief Sawyer and also to Chief Tim Adams about, and they said a lot of these ideas that we came out with, like deep water tanks, and, well, it was some of them they didn't like, but it was some that they said, like cleaning up cedar trees, stuff. But a lot of the people that live in our area, in the Harrison Acres area, they kind of older. They don't have no money, and they don't have the physical ability, to haul it off, pull it off. But we're willing to get the community together and help do this. But, we just need some help. That's all. All we want is some help.
Yeah.
Because we can find some grants and get some money, but we just want some help. That's all we want.
Okay. All right. Christina?
Hello. My name is Christina Pullen, and I live at 6101 Northeast 71st. And I'm also here on behalf of the Harrison Acres community. And one of the things is, what we're seeing is that the people who own the property in our community are not being held up to the same standards as those who reside there. Those that do not live there, the property is completely undeveloped and or taken care of on any level. And I have noticed in the last month that I have seen citations on those properties that exist that are not being maintained, and I appreciate that completely on y'all's behalf of taking care of that. That will help us in prevention of fire if we clean up our areas and make the community accountable for their responsibilities, not coming to you to ask for help that we're not willing to do ourselves. I've personally taken responsibility for maintaining 71st Street from St. Bernard to Sooner via cutting trees down, mowing, and keeping grass cut back on Sooner Road and 71st so that the elderly could actually get out into that intersection safely. So I would like to have assistance as the community for others to be held as responsible for maintaining their property as us that live there. Also, I have contacted the Water Board Resource Department, and they say that there is an ability for us as a community to install private wells with a permit that could be used for fire suppression as well. And that would be a much more cheaper or price-effective alternative for us than to lay a $500,000 water line. A private well would be completely acceptable if we could get that to take place at a much more best price. So those are my concerns. I wanted to say thank you for actually seeing a citation on a person's property in 6 years that hasn't mowed. That's nice for me. And just to see what we can do that's cost-effective, that's a solution where the community can help one another take responsibility for the areas that we live in.
Okay.
And not just make it your responsibility.
All right, thanks. Kevin, you want to wrap it up?
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor and Council. You've heard the problems that we have stated, and we have met and met and met. And my interest in it, my parents are still out there. Brought up 5 kids out there, and they're not going to go anywhere. We do have private health care coming in. But my specific problem is we have a water problem out there. People say a fire hydrant or this, that, and the other, but it's a water problem. We just have to get that water on that fire once it's started. And we have met and met. Our group, of course, is smaller here because it's kind of difficult to get downtown. But I just want to say my specific problem is my mother has been bedbound for about 10 years, totally bedbound. Mom's not going anywhere. She doesn't want to leave the house. My dad is severely disabled on a walker. And like I say, he's 87, Mama's 85. Well, when that fire broke out, and like I said, we all grew up out there. And let me digress a little bit. It used to be we were not in the city. We all had water wells out there, and we have septic tanks. Well, we didn't have garbage service. I remember taking the garbage from the neighborhood down to where Brahms is, and that was the county dump. Most of you all probably weren't born back then, but that was the county dump. Then when that filled up, they moved over to where that convenience store, gas station is. That was the county dump. But we got annexed in. So now we're paying city taxes, no problem. But we have a water issue. We have to get the water on the fire. And we've had grass fires out there for the 50-something years my folks been out there, but nothing like the summer before last. Problem is, just by the grace of God, our caregiver was out there when that fire broke out. I was eating lunch on Northeast 23rd Street when she called and said, Kevin, the fire is burning out here bad. Left my lunch right there, put my blinkers on, and sped past everybody. The fire was everywhere. And I got to 63rd and Sooner Road, and I said, my parents are in the house. Can't let you through. Well, look, Mama's 85. She's bedbound. She has stuff hooked to her because you know how it is being bedbound. You just can't snatch her up because she has stuff hooked to her. And my dad, he's on a walker. He can't get from here to the staircase. So I said, I got to go call 911. Well, I respect the fire. Chief, you know that. I respect the police. I respect rules and regulations. I served in the legislature 24 years. But at that time, do I let my parents burn up? Do I let my parents die of smoke inhalation? I understand the fire departments, there were dozens from different jurisdictions. But do I stand at 63rd and Sooner Road with my mother bedbound? She can only use her left hand to feed herself. My dad can't get out of a bed quick enough to do anything. Just by the grace of God, Almighty God, our caregiver was there. So I went to 3 different stop points, and I found the policeman that I knew. He let me in. Now, my point is, like everybody, if your parents are still living, you love them. They brought up 5 kids. We were educated. That was our home. The electricity never was off, the water never was off, food was on the table, and our clothes were clean. Do I sit there at 63rd and Sooner Road with a possibility of my mother burning up in her hospital bed, a dad burning up trying to get to his walker, and somebody tells me to call 911? So here again, I got through, we got him loaded up in a car, and my mother has multiple sclerosis, 25 years, doctor, and there's no cure. So she doesn't fit in a car anymore. When we take her to the doctor, we have to call MediRide. So what I'm saying is, do I go through that roadblock, or do I have it on my conscience I wasn't the best son that I could be? Mayor, councilman, this is my specific problem. Along with that, we have a water problem out there. The fire was huge, never saw it that big. But my specific problem is, next time I'm going to have to make a decision if I don't find a policeman that knows former Representative Kevin Cox. I got to go get my mother and my father. So I'm not defiant. I don't break the law. I used to make the law. But I got to go get my mother and father. So it has to be some kind of pass that I can get, that I'm not going to be stealing or pilfering or looting. I'm not going to try to put out the fire. I'm not going to get in the way of the fire and the emergency responders. But that fire, when I got in there, was raining down. It was hitting me on my head. I had a T-shirt on with fire burns on it. Everything was burning up out there. And the fire was encroaching on the house, but, you know, we have the grass cut. But that fire was raining down like snow, like hail. And here again, I'm just asking for a solution to this specific problem. When you know old people that are totally disabled and we have not thrown them in a nursing home, can their kids go get their parents and take them to safety? And before I sit down, I want to say thank you for listening to me, listening to the group. It was a lot more, but it's tough getting down here. And I'm glad to see the council starts the council with prayer. For 24 years, we started prayer in the legislature. And I just don't understand why our schools can't pray when we start school day. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, council.
Thanks, Kevin. We have executive session. We'll be back.